Well, I wasn't raised in a Christian home. My father was an alcoholic. He was very abusive towards my mother. So growing up, the household was pretty volatile. And for a lot of years, I blamed my problems on my childhood. In high school, I started hanging out with the wrong crowd a little bit here and there. I started experimenting with alcohol and cigarettes, mostly on the weekends, and it didn't affect my school. I ended up graduating high school and went on to college, but it was at college that things really took a turn for the worse. I ended up getting into harder and harder drugs, eventually failed out of college, and found myself addicted to heroin. I was using heroin and cocaine. I was shooting them intravenously through a needle in my arm, and I found myself addicted seriously, to a point where I would often steal to support my habit, and eventually that led me to getting in trouble with the law, and the legal system tried to help me. They put me in I was in and out of 30-day rehabs, halfway houses. They had tried to put me to see psychologists and psychiatrists. They had tried medication, and none of it worked. I eventually ended up in jail and was facing about 7 years in the state penitentiary. By the grace of God, I only had to do 1 year in a county prison. Well, when I was in prison, I began to suspect that my problem wasn't my childhood. It wasn't a disease that I had been told in rehabs, and that it wasn't some kind of chemical imbalance. I began to suspect that my problem went a lot deeper than that, and that it was a problem at my core, and I began to suspect that my problem was sin. And but for about that year, I tried to please God, or come into a right relationship with God through my own obedience, through obeying God. And in essence, what I was doing was trying to atone for my sin by my works. And what happened was I was able to clean up the outside. I became nice and semi-obedient on the outside, but I became what Jesus called a whitewashed tomb. I was nice on the outside, but inside I was full of dead men's bones, and my sin actually of the heart got worse. And after the year in prison, I went to a program called Teen Challenge, and there a man began preaching the gospel to me. He began really wielding the law of God successfully, showing me that God required from me perfection, and because of me being fallen in Adam, it was not something I could attain to. And my attempt to please God through my own obedience was in fact saying that Christ died in vain. And I began to fear the wrath of God that was justly against me for the rebellion of my heart. And what the great hymn had said became true for me. It was grace that had taught my heart to fear. And through the preaching of the gospel, God regenerated my heart. He took out the heart of stone and put in a heart of flesh, and I saw the vileness of my sin and the beauty of the fountain of Christ, and I flew to the cross for mercy. And one of the scriptures that really was dear to me is that as I saw the wickedness of my heart, Romans 4:4 and 5 took on a new light for me, and it was, now to the man who works, his wages are not given to him as a gift, but as an obligation. But to the man who does not work, but trusts God who justifies the wicked, his faith is credited to him as righteousness. And I began to understand justification by grace alone, through faith alone, in Christ alone, and the desire to use drugs was instantly taken from me, and a love for God was implanted in my heart, and it was just absolutely an amazing transformation, completely by His grace and His sovereign work of regeneration. Well, though as a Christian I'm seeing more and more, the corruption of sin that still remains, that would honestly, if it were not for Christ, drag me down to the deepest pits of hell. I yet have an advocate with the Father. Christ is teaching me how to live by grace through faith in that foreign righteousness, His perfect righteousness, which ushers me into the presence of God and gives me a relationship with the infinitely holy and just God of Scriptures. And He's given me the opportunity to work for Teen Challenge, at which I can share the gospel message with men who are addicted to drugs and alcohol, and who honestly don't have many chances left. A lot of them, if they leave the program, they will die, and face God in judgment. And it's amazing to be able to preach the gospel and see men's lives radically changed. We've just formed a new church here in Harmerville called Sovereign Grace Reformed Baptist Church, and God has allowed me to be called as assistant pastor, and it's just absolutely amazing what He has done for a wretch like me.